Hello, my name is Mr. Pibb, and today we're making a guide on how to make a good deck in Broken Arrow with some tips and tricks throughout. So let's get right to it. Number one thing you need to do is start using a default deck. I know this sounds contradictory to the video title and contradictory to probably what's in your head, but trust me, this is very important because you guys need to understand your play style as that's going to dictate everything else. There's not one single deck for everyone. That's not true. There's good decks, there's bad decks, absolutely. But depending on your play style and the map, and there's so many variables, it's going to affect how you make your deck. And the number one thing that's going to affect your deck building is how you actually play a deck. So for me, I'm a huge tank guy. I use a lot of tanks, a lot of infantry. So therefore, you're going to see a lot of my decks are built around tanks. On the other hand, I know a lot of people that focus on motorized divisions or airdropping or so many other things. I don't personally do that, but you guys need to figure out first where your guys' strengths and weaknesses are and how you guys actually end up playing the game. I generally do not recommend focusing on one play style, particularly air and support only, meaning airstrikes only or artillery only. Especially with a 5v5, you have to maintain a frontline presence at all times, and it's very difficult to do that with just artillery units. As you can see over here, you will not be able to hold a front line with this unit. I promise you that. Um, Combined arms is your best friend. So infantry plus tanks. You want to throw some monoskrelki with a T90. That's a great combination. You want to throw tanks with some ASF, maybe tanks with a helicopter. You need to have combined arms because there's different threats that require different defenses. These create something called a force multiplier too. So when you have two different units, like a T90M and a Ka-52, you guys are going to see some wonderful things because that combination can take out most threats. The only threat it really can't take out is some air units. Now, given that, US and Russia, as you can see up here in the armory, Russia, US, have different styles, but they're extremely similar. And you really need to change how you play with the specific units in the country. So for example, in the US, you're going to absolutely want to use an RQ-170 if you're playing Special Operations Forces. That's a super unit within the US units. On the other hand, Russia, they have the T-14 Armada. Now, if you're playing a Guards Tank Brigade and you don't have a T-14 Armada, that's a very questionable choice, to be honest, because this is a super unit within the Russian army. Now, obviously it is because you don't see them on the front lines of Ukraine either. Now, every specialization is a doctrine of how to be played. Air Command, or I don't believe they call it that, but the U.S. Airborne Infantry and the VDV, they're obviously very specialized for air superiority and airdropping capabilities, resulting in a faster moving game plan with a weak defense. And you can see that for its tank selection. When you're telling me that the M8 AGS is the strongest tank, and we'll talk about armor here shortly, you're not going to have a fun time when you have a T-14 Armada coming right at you. It's going to be very difficult to guard against that without heavy helicopter support or a nice airstrike. So you need to keep that in mind that all of these specializations, these are what they are called up here, have a kind of a style on how it likes to be played. And you can actually see that when you go into the Army Builder. When you click New Battle Group, you're going to see your nations, your name. You're going to have different styles. And it even tells you with a little subtext over here, this highly mobile force can quickly move a large quantity of infantry of trucks and armored vehicles and support them with powerful rocket and launchers. Great. Where's my vehicles? So keep that in mind that each of these are specialized in specific ways. Now, remember, you can only choose two. So for me, I typically end up doing a motorized, which I believe is right here, motorized and tank or air and tank. There's different ways to play, and that's why you guys need to understand your play style because you really figure out what works for you in your play style. Now, we're going to actually go into a little, it's not pre-made, but it's semi-pre-made deck over here. And we're going to get right into it. So in Broken Arrow, you have a sign called Economy. I hope you all are familiar with this. You need to be mindful at all times about your points. It is okay to have excess points waiting for a B2 airstrike, but typically you want to have a slight safety stock, especially later in the game, to adapt your enemy's strategy. Play a few matches, and you'll get a good feel for the economy. Now, on the other hand, we have points, and this is up here. Now, if we go back one, this is actually dictated how big your battle groups are, how big each category of units are. It's actually dictated by the specializations. So in the example I have here, video, we have armor and special forces. Now, as you can see, heavy on recon, very pretty dang light on aircraft and helicopters. Now, on the other hand, if I switch out special forces and switch it to airborne, a little better on aircraft, but not so great on helicopters. As you can see here, doing different mixes, you'll figure out what works best for you, or you can just go a general well-rounded specialization. Now, let's go back to video. Now, video, you have your points. You have 10,000 points. As I was saying, this is dictated by what specializations. In this case, we have armor and special forces. Recon's heavy, infantry heavy, vehicle decent, supply, support, helicopters, air, So keep that in mind. And you want to be very aware of how many points you're spending in each category. And you'll see what I'm talking about very shortly. Now, let's get right into the bones. We're going to go into reconnaissance, and we're going to go just M1A2. Now, something you guys all need to know and study very, very comprehensively, in fact. Well, not too comprehensively, but you need to have a basic understanding, is these right here. These are all your statistics, not in detail. We'll do this for another video, of what you need to know about your units you're putting into your deck. So obviously number one is your points. This M1A2 is very expensive at 300 points. Again, if you play a few games, you guys will understand how expensive this is. And you'll realize quickly, oh crap, maybe I won't take the Rangers RRC in a, well, this is a bad example. Maybe I won't take the Cavalry Scouts in a very expensive, fully loaded out M3A4 Bradley at 145 points. So that's your number one thing you guys need to be aware of is your points. This dictates how much of a unit, or how many units, in fact, that you can actually put into a deck. And it also affects your front line capability, because when you're playing, 300 points doesn't come very quickly. You have to wait a little. You have to be careful. It takes a bit. The second thing is your armor points. So as you can see right here, we have different types of armor. We have anti-kinetic armor, which is in your white, and then you have anti-explosive armor in your red. Now, understanding armor and damage is pretty critical. You guys will all have a basic understanding, but I want to deep dive into this just a little bit more than some of the other categories because it's really important to understand how weapons actually hurt enemies in Broken Arrow. There's two types of damages, as we said, the kinetic, tank shells and bullets, and an explosive, which is more your rockets. I don't think we have a good example here. Actually, these JDAMs, 2-pound J or 500-pound JDAMs would be a good example. So this is an example of explosive damage. So think rockets and bombs. Now your kinetic damage, which is your traditional armor-piercing rounds, which you can see right here. They get more powerful the closer you are to your target. That's hugely important because, up front, this M1A2 is not going to do smack to a T-14 Armada, which has 850 frontal points. But up close, it does a lot more. So you either punch through armor completely, full damage, or you bounce off, which is reduced damage. If your penetration number is higher than the enemy's armor number, that's going to be full damage. So you're going to notice in battle this M1A2, although it doesn't happen very often, it usually takes 2 strikes no matter what. This M1A2 shooting at this MATV is going to completely decimate it within usually about 2 shots. Now you might be thinking, I'm Mr. Pibb. What do you mean 2 shots? This has such low armor. To be honest, I can't really explain that, but that's typically the scenario in Broken Arrow right now. It's not, I don't typically get 1 shots in this game, but 2 shots, absolutely. So if your penetration is lower, your reduced damage down, you can get a reduced damage down to 10%. Now, if your penetration is really low, less than half the armor value of a tank, so let's say there's 1,000-point frontal armor that doesn't exist in Broken Arrow, but let's say there is, this shell would do no damage to it because its penetration is only 500. Now, explosive damage. Let's go back over here to your JDAM. Right here, your explosive damage. These are your rockets, missiles, and bombs. Same power no matter how far away you shoot it from. Yay! They always do the same damage, but heavily armored targets take much less. So me dropping this JDAM right onto M1A2 will do quite a bit because the top armor is pretty light, but it's not going to do as much as a kinetic damage going straight to the top. Now, think of it like this. A rocket will always hurt a tank, but might only scratch a super heavy. So that's something to keep in mind. There's been very successful bombing campaigns. Let's say we pulled out a B2 Spirit. Very successful bombing campaigns with using 2,000-pound JDAMs, and they blow up tanks like crazy. But, there's pros and cons to it. Thankfully, tanks don't have a lot of top armor, so this type of method of attack works great. Now, why this matters for your deck. Light vehicles with machine guns, this MATV, is going to do nothing to this M1A2. So you got to be very careful of that. And that's because of the armor difference, which you can see right here. Does very little penetration. This has a lot of armor. This has a lot of armor. So you need appropriate weapons for appropriate targets. This M1A2 is great against this MATV. But this MATV is not going to scratch this M1A2 at all. Now, this is why combined arms work, because if you have an MATV, but you bring along an M7A2, and, well, this is a bad example, actually, but you have some cavalry scouts with you of a javelin, that's a pretty deadly combo, because now you have a javelin launcher, which has a lot of top armor damage, and an MATV. This combat force right here can take out a lot of enemies, a lot of different unit types. Likewise, with an M1A2 and an MATV, that would be a very effective combo as well. So you always need to check if your units can actually damage what you're expecting to fight in the battlefield. So if you're working with, if you know you're going to be in a city, you're making this deck to be in a city, and this is more advanced. Typically, you won't make decks that are that specific till later on in the game. But let's say you are. This pararescue right here, you notice it doesn't have an RPG, is very, very good. Now, on the other hand, you bring in a special tactics team, still very strong. But you notice it takes out a weapon to add in a stinger. So you gotta make sure you actually the units can actually damage what you're planning to fight. So if you want to bring in these STT, one of the best units in the game, by the way, you can take out a wide range of threats. You're expecting maybe a little helicopter rush. Well, perfect. You got a stinger. And trust me, these missiles, they don't miss too often. They're pretty, and when they impact on the flares, which you'll see in game, sometimes it damages the aircraft. So quick rule of thumb, if you're unsure whether your weapon can hurt an enemy, look at the penetration versus their armor rating. That's hugely important. And then higher penetration equals a better chance to do real damage. So the more penetration you have, which is in this column right here, the higher likelihood this is going to do damage against even a wider range of threats. So this M1A2 might actually have a chance against a Russian super heavy or an American super heavy. Now, you got to remember though, you can't just spam one type of unit. You bring in a bunch of M1A2s and M1 or M2A3s, I believe they're called. You're not going to necessarily be a very effective target against a Apache helicopter full of Hellfire missiles. That's good. That's a very different game you're about to play. Trust me, and you're gonna lose a lot of points and tanks and time and energy, and you probably will rage quit. Please don't. Please don't. So, let's get back right to it. So you got your M1A2. So we just talked about armor and a little bit about penetration. Now you got your hit points. Your hit points is, in most games, is what you consider your health of a unit. It's very important to pay attention to because it does vary between units and unit sizes. Even infantry, it varies. So very important to pay attention to. Just keep an eye on it because it really does impact how strong a unit is. You'll notice this especially with helicopters. So this AH6 killer egg, 10 armor, but you look at compared to Apache, you got 20. Believe it or not, that's a huge difference, and you will experience that on the battlefield. Now, squad size, this is only for infantry. This is very important because this actually affects how many hit points you have. So this squadron of 3 right here is not very effective if you compare it to an STT, which has 30. Very different, very different, very different roles, but you're going to notice this, especially in really tight gunfights. You bring out these cavalry scouts, you're going to die pretty quick. And you'll notice this very quickly, so I'm not going to over-explain it. Optics is most important for this section that we're in right now, which is Recon. You want to basically assume most of your units outside of the Recon section can't see far, and it's best that you need Recon at all times with it or around it. That's generally a best practice. You'll see as when we actually make a sample deck is you want to have this column filled out or this row filled out full of units because you need to have infantry and recon and tanks and recon and drones even pretty much at all times in every deck in every firefight. Now in recon, different units have different optics. And this is what we're talking about. So cavalry scouts are 1750, but if you notice, ranger snipers are 2000. It makes a big difference. M1A2, 2000. Now your drones are where it gets fun. 4500 at RQ170, 4500 MQ9 Reaper. And we'll talk about the big difference between these two right now. The big difference is, I don't know if you can notice this pizza-looking aircraft versus this aircraft is stealth. And you can see that right here. So stealth is another critical area that the US really has a big advantage on over Russia, but determines how fast you will get spotted by an enemy. And typically, you want to make sure if you have the option for stealth units, including like the Silent Hawk, you're gonna want to bring them. You're gonna want to bring them because managing the fog of war can make or break a battle. Now you also have forward and reverse speed. M1 Abram tanks have a very powerful, I think it's a twin turbo engine, or turbine actually, engine in the back. They move very quick. Now, if you look at some of the Russian counterparts, they don't move as quick. So you want to pay attention to this, but it's not critical, but you will notice it, especially when you're reversing away from an enemy. That reverse speed will save your life at times. Now weight is another area, as you can see right here. With Abrams is quite a heavy tank, but these infantry aren't. This affects airdropping capabilities. So if we go to the air tab, you're going to see an MC-130H. This carries 20,000 pounds of cargo. Now if you guys remember, the Abrams is 63,000 pounds. It won't be able to fit on here, but you might be able to fit, and you'll see up here, there's going to be an airdrop column. You might be able to fit an MATV. But do remember, it needs to be airdroppable. Not all units are able to be airdropped. This RSOV is, so you could actually load this off a nice grenade launcher, which does a lot. Notice the difference here between the M2 and the Mark 47. There's a big difference, big difference. Now, one other thing we want to talk about here is range and ammunition. Right, this range right here, hugely important. And it drastically varies between units. So you're going to notice here, I keep forgetting that doesn't have a toe. This javelin goes 1,500 meters, but this tank only shoots at 1,400. So what does that mean? That basically means you'll be able to put an MATV javelin in a tree line and outrange an M1A2. That's very important. Trust me, that's very important. And you'll notice that later on in many games where you're like, why can't I just get a shot off this guy? Well, there's a good chance it could be range. The other thing is your quantity of ammunition. You guys have no idea, especially of ATGMs, anti-tank ground missiles, how fast you're going to run out of these javelins. You will run out of them so incredibly fast, it's not even funny, which we'll talk about in the supply section primarily. Like these 24 rounds, it can go very quick. 16 rounds going, and you're shooting at a lot of infantry in a building. That's going to go by extremely fast. So at the end, I'm going to show you a sample deck on how I would approach this, but let's dig right into recon. And so recon is critical for knowing where your enemy is at and their next game plan. I mean, if you look at a large portion of, like, for example, Sun Tzu's book, Art of War, it's all about maintaining silence and knowing your enemy. He says one famous quote, subdue the enemy without fighting. How do you do that? You do it by managing the fog of war and your perception to the enemy. I swear to God, a lot of battles are won just from perception. There will be times where there's an ATGM in a tree line, but the difference between that ATGM and a tank is you're going to be a whole lot more frightened by that ATGM shooting at 1500 meters at you, and you won't push. That's what happens. You get almost shell shocked. Like, oh, there's enemies in the trees. And there could only be one ATGM in there. And I promise you, this is going to happen to you. You're not going to push because you're going to think there's more enemies in there. You don't know what's in there. So again, recon, heavily important. Very versatile depending on how you play it. Now, I believe there's two types of recon units as a whole. You have your active and inactive. Active ones are more like this M1A2. It fights well. It does a lot of damage. That's how I would define it. It does damage. An inactive one might be these ranger snipers. Now they do damage and they can be a very potent force, but their main intent is literal recon. They're not here necessarily to go to the front lines and do some damage. They are here to recon. So this would be what I would consider inactive. Now, ideally, you want to have both. You're going to want your M1A2s. You're going to want, I mean, I personally never use this, but you might want an M113 fitted out with some recon sensors. There's different mixes, and you'll find what works best for you. I typically go almost full fighting force or active rather than inactive, but that's how my playstyle is. Now, unique to this game, I mean, not too unique. You can see recon aircraft in other games is drones. Drones can be used for either or, as you can see by the weapon ornaments of this MQ-9. Now, this is an active drone, but a passive drone might be this RQ-170 that will fly very close to the front lines and get a lot of recon data, but it has no fighting capability. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. You're not typically going to want to use these as fighting weapons. These are very slow, 360 compared to 540 of a jet drone. They're very slow, no flares, no ECM. We'll talk about that more a little later. So you're going to want to have both. So figure out how you want to play, but it's going to be I'm going to be pretty redundant on this, and that's that you need to have a ton so you get your first strike capability, you know what your enemy's doing, you know everything about your enemy. I wouldn't necessarily try and throw troops in the back of a map, at least beginning. Maybe if you're more advanced, try for it, but I would definitely have these on your front line. Absolutely. Now you're going to notice one other thing that's it's not specific, but it's almost specific to the recon deck, is these laser designation. Laser designation, I don't want you to worry about right now, because to be honest, as in the current state of Broken Arrow, you're going to lose a lot of units trying to get this laser designation, I promise you, because you're going to be up front, you're going to be trying to get a laser designation. These have a range on them, and it's going to be very difficult to pinpoint. So I don't want you to even worry about that right now. It's a cool feature, but this is more advanced. We'll do another video on it. Now, one other thing to know about recon is these are typically your stealthiest infantry. So these Green Beret Punishers have a stealth of 3, which is, I think, actually greater than a B-2 bomber. Yeah, these are greater. Typically, these aren't too large because they're such large targets and they fly so high, so they have to balance it. But even compared to a Silent Hawk. So your Recon tab is going to be stealthier than usual. Even this MATV has a higher stealth than some of the units in its vehicle counterpart. So very important to keep that in mind. But the other thing too about the Recon category is you'll notice here, and we kind of touch on it a little bit. These infantry, and this goes for almost every recon category and all the specializations, they have unique abilities most of the time. Cavalry scouts, 3-man team, a lot of stealth, a lot of recon, a javelin missile. Like, come on, you can't get better than that. Oh wait, you can. STT. And you'll see in the Russian side as well, especially like Spetsnaz. Um, STT, they have a Stinger, they have long-range infantry weapons. Pararescue team, they have flashbangs, they have a shotgun. Really strong in close quarters, extremely strong to be honest. So don't doubt the fighting capabilities of your recon. This is typically where you're going to get your special forces. These are, these are the guys. Now don't get me wrong, you're going to find Delta forces and more Spetsnaz on the Russian side, but don't underestimate the ability. Now, one last thing in the recon section, you're going to notice here, let's say you bring in some Green Beret Punishers, and let's say we want to bring them in a Little Bird. Something very cool about this game is you can actually customize the transports. So in this case, we have an MH6 Little Bird, and specific to the Recon tab, you can actually upgrade the sensors. So all of a sudden, you go from 1,000 to 1,750, super small, low flying, very fast helicopter that can scout 1,750. So now you have almost a force multiplier. I won't consider it that because it's not doing damage, but it really is considering their recon capability. You're bringing these in, and then you're bringing a whole scout helicopter that you could technically keep on the front lines just to scout. So something to keep in mind. Something to keep in mind for sure. Now we're going to go over to the infantry tab. Infantry are the backbone of your deck. They have arguably some of the highest defensive capabilities, easily some of the best value units you can get. I mean, for example, mech riflemen are 50, and Rangers would be a better example. Rangers are 80, and look at all the weaponry they have against a wide range of threats. I mean, these will, if you put them in a good tree line or a city building, they're going to be able to hold their own. I promise you that. They're very good. Delta Force, oh, exceptional when you put on the standoff because they have these Fletcher missiles. So these are going to be your backbone, and there's some of the best value you can get. You'll find in some of the other areas, I mean, a tank, once you fully load this, I believe it's about 380, 385. 385, and in theory, it could be taken out by 80 points or less. Could technically, if you get some rear shots, be taken out by 50 points. That's what I mean. These are great value. And holding tree lines and buildings can literally take out entire well-planned attacks for, in some cases, as low as 50 points. Infantry and Broken Arrow also have some very, very good attack capabilities, at least compared to other RTSs. So for example, this Raz right here, once you put the M4 Carl Gustav, you have 18 high penetration, 3 of them in your group right here, your squad. You have 3 of them, and that can do so much damage if a line of tanks come its way. So much damage. I believe these also, let's check real quick. Okay, these do not, but they do shoot at helicopters. I was going to say they shoot at infantry, but they do not. Again, guys, I don't want you to go into this specific area unless you're kind of nerdy off the start, but once you're more advanced, spend a lot of time in here. Also, we have these. They're called automatic grenade launchers. Super good. Don't ever underestimate one of these. These can hold an entire city. I was playing a match the other day where I was literally holding an entire point by itself, just one of these, and I was getting attacked, and it was holding its ground very well. So do not underestimate these. Great for anti-infantry and also anti-helicopter and some anti-vehicles even. It can do some damage. Not in this deck, but technically the Fletcher would kind of apply, but an ATGM. ATGMs are important. Actually, let's go back. Recon, Cavalry Scouts. This is an ATGM, your Javelin rocket missile. Uh, very, very strong, and you gotta have these in your deck. I don't care what you say. You gotta have at least one ATGM in your deck, no matter what. Usually it's a TOW or a Cornet in the Russian side. You gotta have them in your deck because, again, once you put them in a tree line, you're gonna scare your enemy off for not the entire game, but a good portion of the game. ManPads, which is your, I don't remember the acronym, but it's basically your handheld AA. So in this case, it's a Stinger. On the Russian side, it's the Igla or the Verta. These are very accurate and do a lot of damage. I believe 2 or 3 of these takes out an attack helicopter, a Russian one, or an American one. So they're very accurate. The only counter to them really is flares and a little bit of ECM, but I'm telling you, 3 of these missiles shooting at an enemy helicopter will most likely take it down. So you got to have these in your deck, and we'll explain why here also, why these are critical to have in your deck. Now, you also have man-carried thermobaric launchers. I don't believe it's in here. I don't believe any of these guys have a thermobaric launcher, but some of the Russian units, we'll actually go back to the armory. Some of the Russian infantry actually have these thermobaric launchers that I'm referring to. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Yep, here it is. The Burr. This is a thermobaric launcher. It does a ton of damage, 60 damage, 6 upfront damage to an enemy unit right out of the gate. And trust me, do not mess with these. They will kill an entire infantry squad extremely quick. So let's go back to the deck here. I don't want you guys to be afraid of leading a push with infantry. Typically, that's the best. I mean, Napoleon even learned that you want to push with infantry than your horses. Very similar to today's warfare. But don't also be afraid to defend with just infantry. These guys can really hold their ground, especially once you get an ATGM and a Stinger and even an automatic grenade launcher. You are going to have a very good defense. These guys force multiply with each other like nobody's business. And, once you throw in a tank in there and some other units, oh man, you got a whole line, a very nice line. You're generally going to want to have this row filled out similar to the Recon. You got to have as much infantry as possible. Now, there's different doctrines to how a lot of pro players go about their infantry. But generally, my recommendation is to have a lot of generalists. So mech rifleman might be a generalist. I would get 8 Rangers, I swear, because these guys are so good right now. They're so versatile. They have a lot of health. They move fast. They're just so good. So special forces, higher end infantry, I'd probably send in as many as you can because these Delta forces are worth probably 3 of these mech riflemen because of how much damage you're able to put out and absorb. So you're going to have this maxed out. You're going to want to have a mix. You're going to want to throw in always some man pads. At least get 4. Might even want 2 of these automatic grenade launchers. They do really well. I always bring in these because these guys, they're your anti-tank squads because it's exactly as it sounds. And this is why I play armor. A very good super heavy tank push is extremely hard to beat. Extremely hard to beat. So one other thing that you're going to see in here, and maybe I could have explained it in Recon, but we're going to explain it now, is your transports. Now, you have a varying degree of transports, and I highly recommend you spend some time just looking at each and then learning your playstyle. Now, typically for me, I don't actually run very many of these mechanized units right here, these M113s. Why? because they don't move fast enough and they don't have enough armor to justify bringing them in. They're a good value, especially if you get an armored package on them. But for me, in my playstyle, I typically bring in a bunch of motorized, some light helicopters, and you'll see in the helicopter section some more heavy, medium helicopters. And then a cool thing is, I just want to show you guys a little trick, is that you can actually bring in on foot. Why is this important? Because you notice here we already consumed 300 points. Well, if we bring in Silent Hawks for each of these squads, that's 540 points. That's almost double. So that's a very unique trick that you can do, and I'm going to show you that more when we build the deck. All right, let's go to tanks. This is your vehicle tab. Now, I have a very large bias when it comes to tanks because I believe they are critical to the modern battlefield, especially since there's no FPV drones like Ukraine and Broken Arrows. So they can be a unit that your enemy has to react to. Has to. So if you send out one of these super heavy tanks right here, your enemy has to pull, they have to start pulling strings. They have to start pulling resources, time, focus. They have to move their front around even just to take care of these tanks because they're that potent if they break through your line. They can take you out in one go. Now, on the other hand, your enemy can easily take these out if it's not in a combined force. One helicopter will be able to take out this super heavy tank right now. Now, there's a few different types of tank. You have your, this deck doesn't really have it, but this would technically kind of be it. It's your light tanks and your fire support tanks. So this right here, notice there's only two. That's why I maybe will bring 2 rounds. This tank right here is really good against infantry. Look at the damage, 38 damage. Shoot this at a building, I promise you that building is going to be almost completely gone or destroyed. So this is one type of tank. Then you have your medium tanks. This is almost a heavy tank to be honest, but we'll classify it as a medium tank for this presentation, but it's so close to being a heavy tank, it's might as well be. But medium tanks typically have a capacity to go against an equal tank. So an M1A2, although can take out a super heavy, an M1A2 is typically best for your medium to medium tank combat. Now, on our hand, you have heavy tanks, which I would get, again, I'd probably consider this a heavy tank. This would be more of a heavy tank. Notice the armor difference. I mean, it's slight, but trust me, it adds up. And the penetration difference. A heavy tank, you're going to want to have a ton of. You're going to want to have a ton of. But more importantly, you're going to want to have your super heavies. Now, again, this is classified. It's not formally classified in the game, but this is classified, in my opinion, by how much armor and damage it's able to output. Super heavies are really this and your T14 Armada and maybe the T90M. They're just so potent. They're so powerful. The frontal armor is almost feels impenetrable. It's incredible. It's incredible. So I typically like to have super heavy tanks because of that. They are impenetrable. You gotta micro them. A well microed super heavy is gonna mess up your day. So the most important part in this armor section is you can see the different levels. So super heavy, heavy, medium heavy, and your assault. They have different point cost, and they also have different unit quantities you can actually bring into the battle. This M1A2 you can only bring in 2. This M1A2 you can bring in 8. That's a big difference. That's a big difference. But as you can see here, we go above the points. So I'll tell you what, I'm not sacrificing 2 of these for 8 of these. I promise. I can promise you that. Now, more advanced players, even more advanced than myself, might differ. But for my play style, I like to do this. Again, all goes back to how you play your game. Now, a lot of tanks also have 4 smokes or 2 smokes in this case. I don't know if any tanks have 4 smokes, but they have 2. They automatically deploy. And then you also have your trophy system. Your trophy system's right here. I'm telling you, these are invaluable. When you're doing a push and you got ATGMs coming at you, think about it. This M1A2 can completely counter without even shooting this cavalry scout because it only has 3 javelins, and this tank over here has 4 active protection systems. Very, very important. Very important. So this can make or break a tank's capacity to lead assaults. So this M1A2, it starts going into a town, gets a few RPGs, and it's done for. This M1A2 has a real fighting chance of doing some damage. At least, it might take. It's probably going to take some damage if it's in the combat zone for too long, but it's going to do good. Now you'll see. Notice here, the Recon tanks, the Recon heavy tanks do not have trophy systems, so I typically won't even lead them in the battle. They're typically on the flanks. That's how I end up playing them. Now, you can have your light or assault tanks, and they're extremely useful. I typically will bring 1 or 2, so I'll bring 1 or 2 of these. But it really varies again on your play style, but I like to have them because they typically have a lot of armor and can do a lot of damage, especially HE damage, which is good against your infantry. So I'll use these as support tank pushes. There is one though that you almost always have to have in your deck, and that is your BMPT Terminator 2. If you don't have this in your deck already and you've been playing, put it in. You will not look back. These have so much armor, so much fighting capacity. It has ATGMs, it has AGMs, it has 30 millimeter weapons, autocannons. It's insane. These can attack heavy tanks, super heavy tanks, helicopters, infantry. It's just so good for 190 points. To put this in perspective, for 190 points, you get 700 frontal armor for your anti-kinetic and 1200 for your anti-explosive. A T80U doesn't even have that, and that's 200 points. Now, of course, very different objectives on how you play these, very different play styles, but this is one that you'd probably almost want to always have in your deck. A little bit of a tangent, but it's important to note there are, in every category, examples where you're going to want to have one of each. Now, your medium tanks are good, but I typically won't bring them into any of my decks because by the time you throw in 2 super heavies and you max out, your heavy tanks. I mean, look, I didn't even add in the trophy system and tusk armor, and I'm already over. So very important to understand that you're still playing against a point, so you gotta pick and choose, and that's why I typically won't even bring in any medium tanks like an M1A2. I only bring in the tip of the spear tanks because those are the tanks that your enemy reacts to. Those are the tanks that can do some damage. So while these tanks are great, they can also be very easy targets if not well supported by AA. If we go to the support section, you have AA platforms in here. If you don't have any of these, this tank is a piece of scrap metal essentially. Because trust me, one Apache, one Attica missile, or a few Vickers missiles, oh man, not gonna have a good day. I promise you. All right. Now you want to also hide these when not in action. So this is a pretty common mistake I see a lot of new players make, and even myself to this day. I'll put out my nice, real expensive toy right on the road, no trees, no cover, nothing. It's going to attract a lot of attention because it's worth 350 points. That's as much as some aircraft. So it's going to attract a lot of arty. It's going to attract cluster strikes. It's going to attract stormtroopers or infiltrator squadrons trying to attack it, or even a big tank push. Again, you want to manage your fog of war at all times. And when I say that, I mean not the enemy's fog of war of you. So another thing you want to pay attention to, and we'll talk about that in the support section, is these, they seem like a lot of ammunition, but they go by really fast. I mean, this assault breacher, 2 rounds, that's nothing. That's gonna go so quick. It's not even funny how quick the ammunition goes in these tanks. So you're gonna want to keep these supplied. That's a force multiplier. So let's actually get right into it, your support section. So support is almost always a misunderstood category as they fused logistics, which you can see right here, and you can tell by its support. They fused AA. They also fused artillery. Believe it or not, these are not this variant, but some of the air transports in the game are also troop carriers. So you have a lot of confusion here that could happen, but they all support your main army. That's the whole point of this section. Now, I want to start off with logistics or supplies because this is easily the most neglected area for most players in their entire deck. I mean, you do a short history lesson of Napoleon's War, the World War II, even the more recent 2022 invasion of Ukraine. I mean, you could even argue Iran, which just happened not too long ago. Those armies did not have the supplies to counter their enemy or to go against even their enemy. Many, many, many German World War II tanks were not lost because of enemy fire, but they were lost due to poor logistics. On the other hand, you had Israel in the 12-Day War, and then you had the Persian Gulf War, where they just wiped out entire nations' offensive capacity within days. And the Persian War, for example, or the Persian Gulf War, is 42 days. So I go off on this tangent because historically, it's so important to keep logistics. So important. And there's multiple ways of bringing logistics to the battlefield, but in the support section, you have these units right here. So one reason why you're going to want support, and I know this is very simple, but I just really need to overstate it. This 385 point tank, let's say it gets damaged halfway. Let's say it gets completely killed. You just lost 385 points. Now let's say in that same scenario that you had this 385 point tank and it got damaged halfway, but you brought it to a tree line, you brought it to supplies, you just saved 385 points in offensive capacity through very little points. For every 1,000 points of, they call it heavy ballistic capacity, but we'll call it supply, you bring into the battlefield, every 1,000, it's only 10 points. That's nothing. So you're always going to want you want to max this out. Absolutely want to max this out. You want to have as many of these as you can. Trust me, it's important because you want to keep your army fueled and ready to go. Now you have multitudes of logistics types, not in this deck particularly, but you'll have vehicles, wheeled vehicles, tracked vehicles. Bring around probably 4 to 6 units, or in this case as many as you can, because it's gonna serve you greatly, I promise you. Now I don't prefer to tracked, I prefer wheeled because you want to bring supplies to the battle as fast as possible. But typically some of the tracked ones will have a pretty high supply capacity, but in this scenario it does not. Now, a little bit of a tangent, but when it comes to self-defense weapons on these, I will not bring in any. I won't bring in any machine guns or grenade launchers. I just leave it empty because I need supplies. I don't necessarily need any defensive capacity with these vehicles. Now, again, it might depend on your playstyle, but I can't think of a situation where you're like, oh, you know what? I needed a grenade launcher on here. Especially when you could just have spent that, what was it, 15 points? For 15 points towards a super heavy tank or some infantry. Now, SAMs. This is, I hate to say it, but a little bit of a neglected area for most players' decks. Now, in a perfect world, you want all sorts of radar SAMs and non-radar SAMs. In a perfect world, you want both. And typically your man pads, which are your portable man-carried anti-aircraft missile launchers, they take up your non-radar SAM's position. Now I bring this up because non-radar SAMs are what you typically want on the front line because they cannot get targeted by seed. So in this case, the M6 linebacker is a perfect example. If you look right here, there's no radar symbol. If you look right here, there's a radar symbol. What this means is that in a radar environment, if you turn on this radar, okay, so you're susceptible to seeds, there's not a lot of seed aircraft, but you get a massive improvement on range. Like this PAC-2 missile, super long range. I think this is the longest in the game. When you turn on radar, it goes so far, so far, but when you have it off, it doesn't go far. Whereas these linebackers, even when you upgrade it to a SHORAD, sorry, not SHORAD, oh, just the linebackers, excuse me, they don't have a lot of range to go against enemies. They just have the stinger capacity. I don't believe the Bushmasters actually target aircraft. They do not. So you have your stingers right here, 2,000 meter range, but you turn on these PAC-2 missiles and you turn on radar, you have tons of range. But on the contrary, they get targeted by seed, which is I actually find more on helicopters and aircraft, or maybe even. Now, within the SAM environment, or the surface air missile environment, or AA environment, you have long range missiles. This is your PAC-2, always upgrade to 4. Short range missiles. So in this scenario, this might be your stingers. These would be your stingers. And then you have your SPAGs, your self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, like right here, your PIVADs. Now, all these have the capacity to shoot down ballistic and cruise missile threats, which are vital in Broken Arrow, as you have a large number of players using these missile combinations right now. So you want to have these systems not only for aircraft, but for those. So keep that in mind when you're building your decks. You also want 1 to 2 long-range missile systems like this PAC-2 Patriot missile system here. I almost always put in 2, or as many as I can, unless I'm playing the deck that there's a US combination where you have, I believe, 6 different Patriots. Okay, you don't need that many, but you need 2 for sure. 2 because these are usually more expensive. They don't have a lot of missiles, and most importantly, you can't shoot down helicopters. So these long-range missiles here, they don't shoot down helicopters. They only shoot down aircraft and missiles. That's very important because depending on your playstyle, always goes back to that. But typically your enemy's going to have helicopters. You want guns that can shoot down helicopters. And that's where your short-range missiles come in. Your Stinger and your SPAGs. These are your frontline units. These are what you bring in to handle your short-range issues. Now the cool thing about SPAGs is that I don't believe there's a whole lot of suppression in the game right now. I'm not even sure if it's a mechanic, to be honest, because it doesn't feel like it. But these will do a lot of damage very fast to your enemy helicopters. So a large number of players, I notice, don't bring adequate supplies of PIVADs or linebackers or the customized variant with the 30mm that will shoot down helicopters. They won't bring enough of them, and it really is devastating because one Apache, once your enemy learns that you don't have these out there, they're gonna take you out. They're gonna take out your push. Now, the cool thing about these SPAGs, or self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, is they shoot the ground too. So you kind of want to have these on the front line because these make really good fire support vehicles. I mean, the linebacker, for example, is so good because you're able to just combat so many threats for a pretty good price, especially if you get some Tustery armor on there. Oh man, you got a weapon out in the field now that can take out infantry, some light vehicles, and a lot of helicopters. Notice how many Stinger missiles it has? Now, some players like to run ASF only as their airplane killers. This is a bad idea because, number one, you have to wait for your aircraft to refuel and rearm. That's expensive. That's very expensive. I mean, let's take an F-22 Raptor. Let's take a base model F-22 Raptor, 360 points. Probably going to get shot down. And let's say it doesn't. It's going to take quite a bit of minutes for it to actually refuel, restock, and get back into your inventory. So not only did you lose 360 points, but you also lost 10 minutes. Now your enemy with their Apaches has already taken you over. So please do not think you can run ASFs or air superiority fighters as your main AA. Maybe mid to late game, but you're going to probably have a pack out there anyway, or a Patriot missile system. Now, artillery is actually very contrary to the other two areas. People spend a lot of resources and time and their points, their total points, in this area. Now, yes, many wars are won with artillery, but should never be your main focus in the early to mid game when decisive battles on the front line are still being fought. It is a support unit at this stage. Now, late stage, you can make the argument that could be your focus as you get a better field position, but at the end of the day, you're always going to want to bring artillery in the game at some point or time. Now, for me, I almost always run a tube artillery with high explosive munitions, which here we'll talk about very shortly. But that's typically my play style, and you're going to learn what works best for you. But let's talk about all these different artillery pieces right here because it's important. So let's go back to the laser designation. Remember down the recon section? These all can actually laser designate. I don't know why it says it can't. Or maybe they can't. I thought they could. Maybe I'm wrong. But let's say these ranger snipers, they have laser designation ability. Here's why it's so important. With this prism ballistic missile, see how it has this laser designation symbol right here? It will explode right exactly pinpoint on the target. It's guided precisely, and it's extremely effective. Now, like I said, though, I don't want you to focus on this right now. And why? Because it can be extremely costly to actually laser designate a target. Now, on the other hand, you have high explosive munitions, which is right here. They even call it high explosive warheads. These are your typical, and this is what you'll be using a great portion of the time because it's not extremely accurate, but packs a really powerful punch. Like I can't overstate that. It really does pack a powerful punch, particularly if you're heavy artillery pieces like an Iron Thunder or just MLRS. Now this means multi-launch rocket system or multiple launch rocket system. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Now cluster munitions, that's your other variant that can also be very effective, but I recommend only playing with rocket artillery or the high explosive munitions because as of right now, I noticed for me that does not do a lot of damage, and it's mixed with accuracy. It's about the same as the HE, high explosive warheads, but they don't actually end up killing anything. That's what I notice. So stick with high explosive warheads. They're more versatile anyway, because cluster won't do a whole bunch against infantry. Napalm. We don't have any napalm in here, but particularly the Russians. Let's go back to the armory. The Russians have napalm. This BM-21 Grand, they have incendiary rockets. Now napalm is firebombing. It's extremely effective when you're using an area denial, but one notable factor is it will kill infantry and tanks and vehicles very quickly. Now on the other hand, there's one you almost have to bring in whenever you're playing a guard tank brigade, and that's your TOS 1. Why do you have to bring this one in, Mr. Pibb? It's because it has thermobaric, which means it's basically a napalm mixed with high explosive. It's very cool in real life if you ever have time. It's a vacuum bomb, and it just does so much damage, but the range is limited. That's where it downfalls. Even in the TOS 1A, which is your longer range variant, it's still pretty short. Now you're going to notice here, look at the damage. 10, this is your napalm. TOS 1, 30. These kill tanks. These will wipe out pushes. These will wipe out defensive positions. These are so good if played well. But again, you got to get up close, and you're risking it when you do that. And it take a long time to refuel and resupply. That's something you're going to notice with all of your artillery pieces is they typically take a lot of supply and they take up a lot of time, especially to manage them. Now the highest skill, most underrated, is smoke. These all have smoke. Well, actually, only your tube artillery has smoke, and that's pretty important. But you're not gonna really put a lot of emphasis on that right now because the tanks in this game have smoke. You're going to learn quickly why smoke is so important. We should probably do a tutorial. It's hard to learn, it really is. So there's a lot of different methodologies on how to go about this, but I always do two heavy tube artilleries. So I always throw in two, or maybe I'll do one of these, and then for late game I'll add in a paladin. That's how I play it, mainly because, and we'll talk about here shortly, I'm spending so many points on tanks and infantry in the front line because I always play mid because a lot of players, especially new ones, won't play mid, so I play mid. And because I don't blame anyone, it's very scary because you're dealing with threats from every direction, and you usually have two or three players going against you. Um, Now, on the other hand, a lot of maps don't actually have points on mid, which is surprising. But I typically bring two, but again, there's different methodologies. I've seen some really good players doing high explosive warheads. They focus on ballistic missiles, but I really want to talk about real quick ballistic missiles. This is your other weapon variant and cruise missiles in the Iskander K. I won't go there, but in the Iskander missile system, it has a K variant, which is a cruise missile. Now, these are extremely popular because look at this 50 damage. And then if you go to the actual statistic, the blast radius is really big. These do a lot of damage. They have a high trajectory, very fast, and it's badass, to be honest. It does a lot of damage. This is good. But I think if you're paying attention, these long-range missile systems, the short-range missile systems, and these SPAGs all take out ballistic missiles. So in a lot of games, what I see right now is you'll have some players in the back and they're spamming ballistic missiles. Guys, that's not an effective strategy because a good player is going to have a few of these pack twos with their entire team of four other players, and they're going to be taking out your ballistic missiles before they land on target. Now, that is typically why I don't want new players and honestly, probably advanced players too, playing ballistic missiles too much. They work when you have superiority and no one actually has a decent AA net up, but I wouldn't do it right now because it's really expensive. I mean, it costs more just to bring in an attic cams. Oh, it doesn't. I lied. But you only get two. Takes forever to refill. It's just not worth it when you can get a tube artillery that can't be countered and just does a great job. Now, I want to make this is a gameplay tip, but you guys got to scoot and shoot these guys. You have to shoot your salvo, and you can adjust how long your salvo is in the game, and start moving it. Start moving it, and don't shoot next to your supplies. So very, very important tactics. That's why if you have a wheeled artillery, it just does so good. Now, something I'm not touching on too much is mortars. Um, these are really important, but I find that these larger artillery pieces kind of takes the place of mortars most times. Um, Now, the mortars, the main pro that you have is you have so many to shoot, and they do a lot of damage, and their time on target, how long it takes to aim, is much quicker than these. But for my play style, and it's gonna be very different for you. This might be not the good option for you. Mortar might be. Pro players always bring in mortars, so using that reference, you should probably bring in mortars. Helicopters, another fun section. Now, when they were first deployed in the battlefield, helicopters, it changed everything because they have a large capacity, 32 infantrymen in the seating capacity, 32, and they're fast. They're very fast, and they can land anywhere, and they can fly low. They just have so many pros, so many pros. So I'm going to tell you this right now. You should always, always have transport helicopters in your deck for transporting units and for transporting supplies. And fast. These things are fast. So you always want to have these in your deck. Now, It will greatly affect your battle. I have ran entire matches with just helicopters. You know, I've just been deploying these MH-60s, which are Blackhawks, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. You know, throwing these Chinooks back and forth, back and forth. And you can literally do entire battles and win them because of the speed of these helicopters and how fast you're able to react. So the cons are obvious. They're slow moving, big, as you can see here, even bigger, air target, and they're gonna get a lot of flack. And I don't mean like the non-literal flag. I mean the literal flag. They're gonna get AA missiles coming at you if you don't micro these well enough. So you gotta fly them low, especially when you get to the front line. But if you do go to the front line, you can fly them low. Um, Now you have different types of helicopters for different roles with different armament, and you have different packages really. So again, transport helicopters, you always want to have these. Fully loaded Chinook is great, until you realize that the amount of infantry it takes to fill it up is about 400 points. It gets shot down relatively easily. So that's why you end up typically bringing in these light helicopters because they're 30 points rather than the Chinook. You get a 6-person carrying capacity, and they're extremely fast, extremely small. Have, I believe, a lower, yeah, they have higher stealth rating than the Chinook. It's great, great unit. So you want to bring in both. You want to bring in both. Now, again, it's going to apply for different scenarios. It's going to change, but that's typically how you want to do it. You want to bring in some low cost because you're going to end up using a lot of these, I promise. You're going to want to bring in some medium cost, which are your Blackhawks, very good helicopters, and then some heavy lift VTOL or Chinooks. Now, attack helicopters like the H-64 Apache or K-52 or Mi-24 are devastating, but they're vulnerable to proper AA networks. But they excel at anti-armor work and can single-handedly break tank pushes. But they require careful timing and AA suppression through SEAD or artillery. Never deploy attack helicopters without first clearing enemy SAM threats. Because what I see a lot is these guys, they get confident, they got an Apache, it's badass, throw it in, boom, gets taken out very quick by a Tor and a SAMs or so many different missile systems that can take these out. So you want to almost keep these in the back. Now, how I play Apaches, again, this isn't necessarily a gameplay guide, or an attack helicopter, is I have to keep mine in the back, but enough where the enemy can see it because it's kind of like an ATGM in a tree line or a tank in a tree line. It's just that it's almost like a manipulative thing where you just scare your opponent from pushing because they know there's an Apache. So they spend a lot more points putting in AA. They bring in things that make their attack not well balanced now. Now it's a AA front rather than a tank front, and that has some cons because now you have your tanks and you pull up. So typically a well-planned attack helicopter on a push, because what happens is a push won't have any AA because AA is slower or it's not as defensed, doesn't have as much armor, I should say. An Apache will mess its day up, absolutely. Now in War Game, I haven't seen in Broken Arrow, but people would bring Apaches to the back to their spawn point and just take out enemies like crazy, no one's business because they didn't see them. So these are threats. You want to have these in your deck no matter what. Now, cool thing is these attack helicopters I mentioned earlier, they have more armor. Armor is very important because now these will take those 3-4 man-pads missiles versus only 1 or 2. Very important, very important. Now in this section, I want to bring up 2 areas that are pretty understated. You have decoy flares and electronic countermeasures. Now, decoy flares, you're going to run out of quick. You're going to run out so quick. I think each salvo of flares is 5. Correct me if I'm wrong. So you only have 2 times to deploy flares against enemy missiles. And these basically detract enemy missiles So it's kind of like your trophy system, but for aircraft. And then ECM, or electronic countermeasures. These are actually seen on a lot of Soviet tanks, believe it or not, or Russian tanks, I should say, not Soviet. And they will actually reduce the accuracy of a Stinger or Manpads or any missile, really. So that Stinger is going to usually hit on target, but with electronic countermeasures, you decrease that chance by quite a bit. Uh, it's not super noticeable, and I'm probably going to do a video on a calculation to see if it's worth ever upgrading ECM if you have the opportunity to, like here. But I can't say it's too noticeable, but I can't really comment on it right now. So I want to do a little bit of gameplay tips on helicopters because new players like to play them, and you guys got to keep some things in mind. Altitude, got to keep that in mind. Pay attention to it. You want to keep it low most of the time, but high if it's going to be a recon role. Route planning, never fly nearby SAMs. You want to combine arms with these with tanks or other helicopter insertions to do a nice push. Countermeasures, you have your flares, but keep in mind this doesn't have flares or ECM, so you might have a good chance of dying in this. Now, common mistakes is you'll fly in predictable patterns on the front line. You won't move it. That's a big one, huge one. You won't check for AA before committing and treating them like a ground unit rather than using their unique ability of maneuvering on a battlefield. Now, guys, the speed advantage cannot be overstated on these helicopters. If your enemy is doing a push on your flank for 300 points, you pretty much have a full counter outside of seed, at least on this variant. I believe this one has seed missiles. Seed is suppression of enemy air defense, and we'll talk about that more in the airplane section. But you can effectively haul at least a push or stall a push pretty dang well. So keep that in mind. And this is why you're going to want to play these in decks. I mean, not the sole reason, but a big reason. Now, aircraft. Aircraft, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Do people put so much time into here? I mean, I can't blame anyone. How fun is it to nuke your enemy? How fun is it to call in the AC-130? I don't know if you guys played, Modern Warfare 2 or the newer ones, but AC-130 inbound. I mean, how cool is that? Now you can actually bring one and make it a spooky variant, which actually has your higher damage guns. I mean, it's cool, but it's not cool losing 1,000-point bomber. It's not cool losing your fully decked out. Here's fully deck out this Raptor, 440 points. It's not cool losing it in one missile. These Patriots, I'm telling you, and the Buk missile and the I'm butchering the name right now, the S300, S400 systems, they one-shot aircraft right now. That's not fun spending, a 440 points on an aircraft that gets one-shotted. Now, again, they're not, I don't bring in a whole lot of aircraft, being honest. I'm not the guy to talk to when it comes to aircraft because I'm very against them. And you're going to notice this. I want you guys to play aircraft a few times and you guys will see what I'm talking about. These aircraft typically aren't positive. Now, what I mean by that is for you to get your points back, 440 points, you have to kill 440 points. Now, in a ground variant, how are you going to do that? In this example, let's say right here, 2 JDAMs, 2,000-pound bombs, Mark 84 bombs, 250 points. You gotta lock onto a very high value target for this to actually pay for itself. Now, for 250 points, this isn't too bad, but a worse scenario, B2 Spirit. I mean, I see a lot of people run these cruise missiles. Oftentimes, these get shot down before the cruise missiles even take off, and they won't go positive. Now, on the other hand, if you play these strategically, let's say you have an enemy that has a strong point and they have some infantry in some buildings, some tree lines, some tanks. You're gonna, and you need to take them out. Well, crap. These mother of all bombs right here that they just used in Iran. I mean, and you're able to capture a point right when you need it to. That's might be worth it. You could argue that's pretty worth it. It depends on the scenario, but yeah. Now, the exception I find to that law I was talking about where you typically won't get your points back is suppression of enemy air defense work, which is still risky, and air superiority fighters, especially the long range ones with the long range missiles, like for example, it's F-22 Raptor. These do not absorb a lot of points and can deliver a positive kill ratio. I think there's a seed variant in here. Yep. So the F-35A is your seed in this deck. So this can go positive, but one thing to know about any of these anti-radiation missiles or your cruise missiles is they can actually be shot down by your SAMs or AA missile systems, even a SPAG. So you got to keep that in mind if you're sending in a B2 fully loaded with your cruise missiles. Now, ASFs, let's talk about this. This is Air Superiority Fighter, that's what it stands for. You gotta have these in your deck. Whether you're paying the air tax in the beginning, you'll know what I'm talking about probably in one match, or doing air sweeps or reacting to a transport aircraft or bomber. These are critical to have in your deck. Oftentimes, a single Raptor or any other ASF will pay for itself by killing UAVs alone. Because what you'll find is if you scour the front, you're going to find a lot of Reapers, you're going to find some RQ-170s, and you're going to find drones all over the battlefield. And, 100 points, 100 points, 100 points. Soon enough, you literally go positive just by killing UAVs. But, you kill out a transport aircraft fully loaded, man, oh, what a dream. Just does some great things to your point ratio. Because oftentimes in this game, you're just fighting for points. Who can kill more? Who can have a higher KD? Typically, your higher KD team wins. Very rarely do a low KD team wins. Very rarely. Now, strategic bombers, that's your next unit. These are your B1, your B2, your 295. These are these heavy bombers. They're high capacity. They carry nukes. I believe all of them carry nukes. Correct me if I'm wrong there. They carry nukes and they do so much damage. I mean, so much. And a ton of cruise missiles, extremely big bombs, big bombing runs. I mean, some of the time, these are real threats. I mean, you get one with cruise missiles, man, your front line can be pretty devastated or at least heavily damaged from just watching one of these just devastate your troops. Oh my gosh, nukes, man, they don't pay for themselves most of the time, but they can do some big time damage, especially on infantry. So you got to be careful of these when you're playing defense, but playing these, that's that's tough. That's tough. I don't play them because I have a very hard time actually getting my points back, and they take up a ton of your space. I mean, just for one nuke, I can't even get an ACF in here, ASF in here. Yeah, I don't even think I can get a base model F-35. Oh, you can. So you're going to want to take advantage of the unique traits of these bombers. So in the B2 Spirit, it's a stealth bomber. Some of your air variants like the B1 has afterburners. Your 295 has a super large capacity, but they have a low speed, so it's easier to micromanage and maneuver cruise missiles. Now you have multi-role aircraft. Um, this would be like an F-35A, but you can even consider an F-22 if you use it as such. I don't like bringing these, to be honest, because they're too expensive to be worthwhile to outfit a F-35 to be good for ASF and bombing. I mean, let's put a 2,000 pound bomb. That's pretty much the size you need to do something. That's 345 points that you could have had towards a nice ASF. And the thing is, these bombs, like I said, you drop one bomb, you're over front lines. You're not going to get your points back. Cruise missiles, they almost always get shot down. That's why I don't play them. So again, very hard to play with, but the one I highly recommend playing is Seed. So right here, this is a pretty good combination right here. You have one Seed missile, and you can see it right here, anti-radiation, with 3 AMRAAMs. I mean, it's not great, but you put this on the front line real quick just to do a scout, shoot a harm off. I mean, you wasted one of your enemy's missiles because they're gonna take it down, but maybe you shot down a few drones on the way. Maybe you shot down an aircraft. You're gonna want to play more F-16s though and non-stealth aircraft because these don't really have enough missiles to do a lot of damage. 3 AMRAAMs is nothing in an air fight. I mean, it goes by in one churn. One churn, you already shot off all your missiles. Now, this deck doesn't really have it, but we'll go to a deck that does have it real quick. We'll go to the armory. Let's do the Russian side for a change. In the Russian side, you have your Su-25. This is an attack aircraft. Honestly, these can be very excellent to play if you micro these because they can fly low. They're armored. So notice that armor right there. They're armored so they can take a lot more hits. I mean, I've seen these take 2, 3 Patriots even. And with certain equipment packages, and sometimes it can be even under 200-300 points like this one is, you can do a lot of damage. A lot of damage. I mean, just one super heavy with this variant right here, if you're able to kill one super heavy, I mean, you pay for itself almost twice. So, you can play these, but again, learn your play style. I don't bring them in because, as you saw in the video deck, there's really not a lot of points, and you'll see when we actually make the deck, it gets absorbed very quickly. Now, light attack aircraft, let me actually go back to one more time to the armory. Light attack aircraft, like, let's say the Yak-38, this is a good example. These, I've not really seen many people play these well because they don't really have ECM. They get shot down by long-range SAMs quickly because they're usually slow, like the Harriers in our example. They're pretty slow and they don't really have big packages, weapon packages, so it's kind of hard to justify bringing these in. But, they almost always get shot down, so, strategically, if you really need to kill that tank and this is all you got, okay, fine, but I don't know, I would definitely put my points somewhere else. Now, I want to quickly mention one more time, this isn't definitive, it's just a general guide because, again, some players are going to find huge success with a night attack. But, this is general, this is what I've seen on the battlefield throughout a lot of my RTS experience in Wargame and Warno and Broken Arrow, but also just in general. Now, transport aircraft like this one right here, I mean, it's tough because it's the same thing. High risk, high reward. You can pack a lot of even armor in here. You can pack, some certain variants of armor. None on here, I don't believe. You can pack vehicles, armors, tons of troops. I've seen some really good plays with these, but for my scenario, I don't like using these. Now, one thing I've seen a lot of people do, which I don't recommend, is they'll put these in their deck for the use of supply. I don't like that idea because what happens is you get a lot of AA fire. It usually takes down the aircraft. You just lost 200 points. So, and then the other thing too is when you're airdropping, the supplies parachute down. It's going to attract arty fire. So it doesn't really work very well. But for the matter of just airdropping in some troops, it can be a good play. Can be a good play. Now, Seed Electronic Warfare, again, I highly recommend you play. These can do some wonderful things. There's one in the American decks that is super good. Some of you guys probably know what I'm talking about. It's not here. It's not here. Where is it? It's Marines. The EA-6B Prowler. This has 8 harms. Well, 3 harms once you throw an ECM. 3 harm missiles, ECM, a long loiter time. That's right here in your fuel section. That. I mean, that's a versatile weapon for only 235 points on the Russian side. They don't really have dedicated. Hold on, let me remove this. They don't really have dedicated. They more rely on their multi-role aircraft to provide ECM, but they do have one variant. Oh, I don't know if I'll be able to find it quickly. Oh, it's right here. No. No, there's a big aircraft. I think it's one of these Su-22 variants. It is. Yeah, it is. No, I lied. Sorry, guys, I lied. Oh, no, it is. The problem with these aircraft is the turn radius and versus speed is just too big, and you end up flying into combat range very quickly. But so you really need to micro these pretty well because once you launch your high range missiles, you gotta pretty much micro them back or they're gonna get shot down pretty quick. Now let's go back to the deck real quick. You have one last unit. What a fun unit. An AC-130 gunship. Players will lose a lot of money here because as a current state of the game, the angle of attack these need to get at to actually attack on its enemy is very slow to get to, and these are very slow aircraft, and they're huge with no stealth. You're gonna get a ton of SAMs at you very quickly. I mean, I've seen it where it took 20 seconds just to get in firing position. I mean, there's not very many battles where that's going to make sense, and this is costing you points that you could be spending elsewhere. Now, I want to tell you guys some aircraft survival tips. It's very similar to helicopters. You want to make sure you never approach targets from predictable angles. You want to play your terrain. You want to do terrain masking, so fly low. We'll do it on gameplay. Package coordination, so you want to overwhelm multiple aircraft or you want to overwhelm an area. It can be a good idea, and not always. ECM management. If you're deploying flares on your own, that's probably a bad idea. Target prioritization. You want to hit your AA first if you can, because that's going to be what takes your aircraft out, and that's AA's countering your air superiority attempts. But after you take out AA, go for high value targets. Go for that super heavy tank. Escape planning. This takes a little bit more advanced, but sometimes if let's say you're flying a Nighthawk, you kind of want to know what angle you're going at, so that way you can go back into friendly lines as soon as possible rather than getting shot down. So again, there's a reality check here. Aircraft points are limited and precious. Every plane you lose is gone permanently, while ground units can be replaced. I mean, that's not permanently, it's temporarily, but a ground unit gets damaged, okay, fine, but an aircraft, it's gone. It's gone. And then when I say it's gone, I mean it's not only gone point wise, but time wise. It takes forever to get back into stock, at least compared to other units. So this creates a natural attrition disadvantage for air heavy strategy. So if you're running a full deck, I mean, they're gonna make you expend your aircraft on low value targets early. Smart opponents will, leaving you pretty defenseless, especially in late game air pushes. Now, as players get better at AA management via time, aircraft become increasingly less cost effective. So, maybe right now, let's say you're an advanced player and you're doing great with a cruise missile or a JDAM package. As players gets better and your elo goes up, I mean, you're gonna come into some problems. Now, the golden rule is make every sortie count or attack run count, because you probably won't get a second chance with that airframe, especially if how good AA is right now. All right, guys, this leads me to the next part of the video. We're actually going to create a deck now. So let's get right to it. So this is how I would play my deck. So I actually start off with what I know I want, and that's my super heavy tanks. I love these super heavies so much. We're gonna add two in right out of the gate, and then heavy tanks. Now, like I was telling you guys earlier, these tanks are so invaluable because your enemy has to react. They survive so many threats. You don't have to micro them too crazy. They're just so versatile. Until the game developers decide to add FPV drones, bring tanks. I mean, that's my opinion, and that works for me, but bring some super heavy tanks. All right, I got my vehicle tab down. Now, for me, I like to go to support next because I kind of already know what I want. Um, but it's again, this how you go about this more matters on what you know you want to bring, and that's based off your playstyle. So for me, I'm gonna bring in Iron Thunder, just one. You got to pay attention to his points. I'm gonna bring in two Patriots. Now, when it comes to weapon packages, notice I upgraded the 4 missiles because you run out of missiles quick. 2 missiles, I mean, that goes by quick. Self-defense, none. But I am adding an armor package because that little bit does kind of help when you're escaping. So I'm bringing in two of those to protect my front line, especially light game. I like to bring in these. I do upgrade to the engine and the armor, mainly because you want to have these around on the front line for as long as you can, because you typically only bring one or two, at least I noticed from all my pushes and other people's pushes. So two of these, notice non-radar, good against seed, follows your tanks, have the same speed as your Abrams, because I believe they use this, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they use the same engine. I also like to bring in some PIV because these are really good, really good. And then RD wise, I'm going to bring in one more of these. I have some points left over. I'm bringing in some transports. Now, I'll be honest, it's probably best to go transport first, but this is how I would make my deck. Now, notice you can go a little over. That's going to backfire here in a bit because what's going to happen is I'm going to have to downsize in other areas, which will probably be my air tab. Now, infantry, Delta Force, got to bring in your special forces. Got to. I tried close quarters, so what I like to do in my decks is I'll have a reconnaissance special forces tab, and then I have my infantry special forces tab. Um, I like to choose one for close combat, and in this case, I like to actually, well, it varies tremendously, but in this scenario, I will run Delta Force as my close quarters. Now I'm going to do something very interesting here, which you guys will probably notice. I'm going to bring in a War Pig and upgrade it to the grenade launcher. Because these grenade launcher guys, don't underestimate them. They do a lot of damage from afar. They're great support units. Great support units. And only 50 points, tons of speed, just really strong. So I'm going to bring in one of those. I actually am going to bring in two. I'll tell you why here too later. I like to max this out because trust me, you want these and these last a while. Next up, I'm going to go to my AA. So what I do is I compare AAs real quick. So the main thing I'm comparing is squad size, the quantity of missiles, range of the missiles, and see they use a J, and we can actually compare right here. So they use the F and the J variant. The J variant's better. Squad size is the same. Points is more, but that's fine. All right, we are going to add in some stingers. I max this out. Now I'm going to go right here. I don't like these vehicles because they're 45 points when I could have some war pigs that actually have a lot of capacity and a better weapon. So I will actually bring these on foot, so that way I don't waste points. Now these raws, super good. Bring in these. I bring them in for ATGM. I'm going to bring them all in little birds. Because guys, these little birds, don't underestimate them. I'm telling you. Rangers, I'm actually going to bring these on foot. And you're going to be surprised here in a little. Now the close quarter variant is good. But the standoff variant, for how many there are, there's just too many scenarios where you want standoff versus close quarters. I'm going to bring pretty much as many as I can, 8 in this scenario. Now I avoid these guys because they're too, not these guys, but these guys because they're very niche. They don't have any rockets. Their range isn't very good, at least compared to an automatic grenade launcher, which is actually going to be our next group of infantry we bring in. I like to bring in 2 of those. And now we have some points. So now we bring in some general infantry, which I'll be honest, you don't usually end up playing. But what I do with these general infantry is I will actually put them in a fully decked out Bradley. Now, why do I do this? I do it because sometimes you really could use a tow missile carrier on the front lines, an ATGM, and I will sometimes play this as my ATGM, and it's just a really solid support vehicle. So I'm going to keep that at there. I'm not going to go over because I need to make sure I have points for these other sections. Now Recon, this is where I get my ATGM. I don't use any of these variants. Why? Because I'm going to use these down here and I want to save up points. Now I might change my mind depending on how many points I have left over. So we're going to load those out. Green Beret Punishers. I don't like bringing these guys. That's a hot take because they're pretty popular right now. But I don't like bringing these guys because they're such a small unit. They're only 4 people, and they're not survivable. Once they get targeted, they're just not survivable. They look cool though, like a cowboy hat. Pararescue, switch these out. STT always. Brings some little birds with the upgraded optronics system because I mentioned earlier you want to have some scout helos. And then what I do, I just bring in 2 and then I bring in the rest. Because the reality is you're not going to have all these deployed at the same time and you're going to actually return to base most of these transport units. Now Rangers RRC, I do like to bring a standoff variant of these because they're so long range and they're so versatile and they have scouting capabilities. I'll bring 1 Silent Hawk just in case. Now some Ranger snipers. I like to bring in 2 of these. Now here's where it gets expensive. I max out these because I like to have these on the front lines. Now here's where you gotta start playing points. So I noticed I had 4 there. I'm removing it to 1. That saves me 240 points. Gotta bring in some Sentinels. 2. I might remove 1 of these so I can bring in 1 of these because I like to have this variant on here. There we go, perfect. This is a really capable vehicle that can just roam the field if you're flanked so well. So well. I'll explain here too. The Recon tank has a higher stealth, higher optics, really strong. I don't bring in any of these because for the money, they just don't bring a lot of value. I mean, to see this close when I have these infantry just doesn't really make sense. This one I have played a few times, and I'll be honest, it's good, but it's not that good to justify bringing. Now these MATV Javelin, again, 3 Javelin missiles, a sniper rifle that's anti-penetration, and then the grenade launcher. It can just hold, it can support so well. MQ-9 Reaper, I don't bring these because these get shot down so easily because they're high flying, very slow, no stealth. RQ-170 on the other hand, man, if If they ever made it to where you get more of these, I would take out some of these to bring in more. Absolutely. Because these are almost sometimes my entire uh, recon. So here's how we're looking so far. I got 7,700 points left. Helos, hugely important. I don't upgrade the guns on here because these are strictly, I just want cheap as possible, in and out. I bring in all four because these have 12 carrying capacity. That can carry a ranger squad. It can carry two of your specialty squads and all your recon squads. And it's only 90 points. It's fast, has a lot of ECM, like more than most aircraft, and flares. It's just really good aircraft and armor. The second one, I bring in one of these. I actually do upgrade the ECM on these though because they're so big. They attract a lot of fire. I bring in one Osprey. Actually, I actually bring in two of these. The cool thing about these are, and I didn't explain this probably well enough, these are VTOL. So VTOL basically means vertical takeoff and landing. And so these can fly as a plane, so super fast, 500 speed compared to 290, and then go to helicopter mode and drop off its units. Really good for fast insertion. Now, one other fact is here is you can drop a lot of supplies off with these MH47 and this Osprey. So really good to have on your deck. But I like these because the fast insertion really pays for itself quick. Now, there's always a debate. Not always, but do you bring in a Comanche or do you bring in an Apache? Now, your Comanche here is stealth. That makes a world of difference at times, but I prefer the Apache because of this armor. This armor is just a world of difference between that and the Comanche. So I bring in an Apache, also because of points. Right now it's 140, but once you actually deck this thing out with 6 Hellfires and radar, it's 250. Well, for 300 points, look at how much more you get. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I mean, you just get this. Let's make it this variant. I mean, for 50 more points, you get, what is that, two more Hellfires, the better variant, the JAGM, essentially Hellfires though, which are fire and forget, daggers, which are so good against infantry, and then you get a 30 millimeter cannon. Here you get a 20 millimeter cannon and 6 Hellfires, and that's it. You're going to be resupplying this thing a little too often, at least for my flavor. So I actually like to load this out pretty well. Actually, that's exactly how I load it out. So I have some remaining points over. Most decks I throw in another Chinook, or I'll throw in a killer egg. I'm not a big fan of these because they don't have any flares. But I've seen if you are going to play these, play them as stingers. Just some AA halos. Did you bring in one in? I mean, it does a lot of good things. I'll put one in this deck, for example. Air, again, I'm an ASF guy. You're going to have multiple opinions. Now, I'm playing with not a lot of points here, so I'm going to have to fine tune the points, but I bring in full ASF. I bring in Raptors over F-35s because of the payloads. I mean, even if you get this nicely fitted, you get 6 missiles compared to 8 missiles. You have a faster, actually they're both very fast aircraft. But I just tend to have a better time with the F-22 because of those two Sidewinders, which are really good against halos and a higher maneuver and target. So I will bring in 2 of those most of the time. This is my air tax. And then I'll bring in an F-22 with harm missiles. And you see I'm a little over. So sometimes what I'll end up doing is I'll remove an ASF and then add in a bomber or another F-35, but since I'm pretty tight on points, I will actually remove this killer egg, go to air, I have this as cheap as I can get it, and I don't want to move that. So what I'll do here is I'll take away points from the Raptor F-35. I have enough for another F-35, so I will roll with that. This will be my deck. So this is how I would make a deck for me. Varies per person. Can I explain why? Hopefully well enough. It's a long video, to be honest. So I hope I explained it. I'm going to go more in depth on certain things, but this is how I would play this deck. Well, sorry, that's not how I play it. This is how I'd build this deck. And I would play this deck by doing a heavy armor push with a lot of infantry support, a pretty diverse AA net. I would resupply of helicopters, low flying, and a little in the behind of the line, but not too far off. I'd pay my air tax. Late game, more tanks, high value tanks. I'd start bringing out my artillery. Always keep some RQ-170s up. And this is a very versatile deck. You could just do so much. But this is an example of how I would build it, what I'm looking at, how I go about it. I built a lot of decks, trust me. It doesn't look like it in here, but in the beta and some games are very comparable to this. Oh, so many decks. So key takeaways here, really spend some time in the armory. And when I go for the armory, I first start with the country that you're wanting to build a deck for. Build one for both countries. You're not always going to play US. You're not always going to play Russia. And once you learn your play style, kind of look at the different options. So like, okay, I'm a big special forces guy. Let's take a look at what options I got here. Well, motorized. Huh, this is interesting. I can do some really, oh, Cornet as an ATGM here. Huh, this might be the deck for me or the specialization for me. But wait, the mechanized have, so spend some time in here, figure out how you want to play, what units you want, where you want to focus. And then honestly, go back and forth. Just make some trial decks. You'll see in here, I have a lot of decks where I'm just kind of not necessarily playing around, but like, oh, US, I kind of want to try a striker, but cavalry regiment, but I kind of want to make it airborne. And so then you end up making a deck, playing around, and then you're like, okay, but I'm really weak without that super heavy, and my playstyle requires that. I guess I'm gonna just maybe choose an art deck, or maybe I'm gonna try in this new playstyle. It's all sorts of ways to go about this, but ultimately, at the end of the day, have fun. Don't put too many points into situations that are going to fail. We'll go over this in the gameplay tutorial. But just take it easy. Take it easy. Don't stress out. Sit in one line, front line. Put in units. Don't focus too much on artillery and air. It's important, but don't put too much emphasis on it. Just control your front line, support your team. And by supporting your team, I mean controlling your front line. It all goes back to that. Maintain your fog of war. Be conscious of your points. Don't be wasting points on failed attacks. And you'll have a great time. So anyway, please leave a like and subscribe and shoot a comment below if you have any other questions. This is my first YouTube video, so be mindful. I'm probably not the best explainer, but we'll get better over time, guys. I promise. We'll get a lot better. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day and take it easy. Have fun on this game. It's a great game. There's so many good players. This is the largest RTS I've seen in a while in this category. It's just so much fun. So much fun. Anyway, guys, take it easy. All right. Bye now.